Hey guys, this is a guide on how to do what I call a hard reset. For me, that means that every few years you get stuck in life in some way, whether that's life being too easy or too comfortable or even too hard, just operating from unconsciousness or ways you've been operating in the past, and suddenly you're not the version of you want to be in the future now. You don't have the goals that you want to have now. So every couple few years, as a standard practice, it's great to just go through and re-examine everything, update your paradigms, your habits, your goals, your identity, and really move things forward. And this is an area that I've been focused on for years and years and years and years. So I've gotten pretty good at this process to a point where now I'm the best I've ever been in my life, and I know I can't go backwards because of this practice. So now this is something I want to share with you. It doesn't have to be something to be all taken in at once, though it can be really helpful to pause this, to rewatch stuff, to even revisit this every 2 or 3 years. And even if you just take 1 or 2 takeaways in that time, that's really amazing because you're going to live another 30, 50, 80, indefinite amount of years. So if you have this upward trajectory, that's part of the good life, like according to a lot of philosophers, but it's also the way you're going to get to the life that you want to live. It's how you're going to achieve the goals that you want to have. Because at the end of the day, so far as we know, we literally only get this one life. We have limited time, so it's great not to waste it and we can get the most out of it. The most important part of this, really, is just knowing what do you want. What do you want and move towards that. That doesn't mean letting other people decide for you. It doesn't mean even what you wanted for yourself in the past. It doesn't mean just letting chaos or the current take you. But if you don't know what you want, you're never going to get there. It's not this kind of natural go with the flow process, but by being deliberate, that's really helpful. There are tons of courses and guides and books on how you can do that, and it's worth the process and time to go through it. Something that I find is really practical that works for me personally is vision boards. I'll just collect a bunch of pictures, put them on Pinterest, and then print those out and put them up somewhere that I at least get reminded of them so I'm not caught up in the flow of unconsciousness. This could be the person I want to be, habits I want to have, people I want to meet, the lifestyle I want to live, things I want to own, places I want to live. But by putting that together in something that's really authentic, then that helps a lot. And this authentic part is very key because if you're not authentic about what you want, you're not unconsciously pushing yourself to achieve these goals. You're going to be self-sabotaging along the way. So make sure that they're things that you really want for yourself. And they can't be too big, too grand. They can't be miserable or expecting too much of yourself because you got to enjoy life along the way if it's going to be sustainable. They got to be things that you can remember or be reminded about if you're actually going to move towards them. In setting these goals, it's really important to keep in mind purpose. Most people these days think happiness, I just want to be happy, is the most important thing, but literally that concept didn't even exist until about the last 150 years. What's more important than that is actually purpose. Whereas happiness is something relative. It means that, oh, I'm happy, and then that becomes normal. And then suddenly you're normal, and you're like, why aren't I happy? And everybody else seems happy because they're saying I'm good when you ask them how they're doing, or they're posting their best lives on social media. But you can't always be happy because that's just normal. And then suddenly you're unnecessarily depressed or questioning yourself or anxious. What's really important is to actually just have purpose. If you have purpose, you have a reason to take care of yourself. You have a reason to even live, to be alive, and happiness can just kind of take care of itself. But even if you're not happy, you're still fine because you have just a good reason to exist and some sort of supernatural power or lift that pushes you forward. Purpose was the meaning of life for the vast majority of human existence, and it isn't until recently that thing ever changed. So is it better to go with this little, I need happiness because life is too easy and I have a lot of idle time, or that because celebrities are showing off that everything needs to be happy? Or is it better to have this kind of deep-seated sense of purpose, this thing that gives you a strong confidence, this inner stillness, this strong identity that makes you have full control over your own destiny? The next most important thing, and this is really a special one, is to take responsibility. Responsibility for your life. The biggest problem with young people today, and it's so cringy, is this victim mentality, this toxicity that I can't control the world, or it's up to politicians, or it's out of my hands, or it's my bigger problem, or this person's holding me back, or I have this disability, or I'm like sensitive to this and have this allergy. Take responsibility yourself, and that's how you get to control life. In the past, people had some sort of ceremonies to become adults where they had to prove themselves or to really push things or to move past the fact that the world is literally not fair. It's never going to be fair. That's not the natural state of the world. A lot of people are like killed when they're born. A lot of people are killed like when they're adults. A lot of people are killing themselves by not taking responsibility for themselves to become people that are unkillable. So by taking responsibility, you actually give yourself the full agency despite the odds to do everything you want to do. And the counterpoint to this is the victim mindset, where it's easy to blame others or to have excuses, but it's actually victims, not bullies, who are the most toxic people in the world. Victims have these masks on, these blinders, where they're throwing shit everywhere and not taking responsibility for anything. They're saying that they can't own their bad behaviors or their bad personality traits because that's just how they are, because this other person did something, my parents raised me this way. As an adult and as a conscious being, you get to control your destiny. So you need to own that. It might be hard, you're gonna fail a lot, it's gonna be really painful, you're gonna have to rewire your brain. But at the end of the day, taking this responsibility and not being a toxic victim is going to be one of the most essential parts to having the kind of life that you want to drive towards. It's important to understand that this stuff will take time, it'll take sacrifice, it'll take discomfort. Most growth requires pain. Literally, everything in the world is trying to kill us at any moment. Gravity is trying to crush us, we're constantly starving, but we're also systems that get stronger through pain and resistance. Like, we literally get stronger the more we're damaged in certain ways. The people who have some trauma or tend to be more resilient than people who have no trauma. We need years to change, years and years and years. It could be lifetimes, but if the last 10 years of your life you have true peace and you don't judge things, you don't have expectations, you really just enjoy and relish life, that's something that's worth driving for, because what are the alternatives in the meantime? And it's nice to also be graceful with ourselves, to understand that we're not going to be perfect, we're going to fail a lot, we're going to go back to the beginning, we're going to go backwards sometimes. But as long as we have this intention, over the long term, things will start to work out. If you do one thing every day to make your life better, then over the course of weeks, that becomes noticeable. Over the course of years, that becomes noticeable. And it could be the smallest little action, but it shows a sense of self-respect, it shows a sense of forward movement, and also shows a sense of actually just getting momentum going. When after months or years of having this intention, of maybe being a little bit less lazy or doing one small thing before you're exhausted and settle down on the couch to watch TV, one little thing gives you that little strength, and that momentum builds over time. And eventually, over the course of months and years, you start to even notice the results of that. And every time you look at those little things, you're proud of yourself and you're like, oh, I can do this, or I feel good about this, or maybe I do have the energy for this. We are dopamine-driven animals, and that's the chemical for achievement, for pursuing things. It's not forgetting them. And so we can almost play with ourselves, almost like engineers, where we are kind of like robots or some sort of systems in a way, and with conscious minds, we do get to dictate our behavior. Something that I've found as someone with ADHD who has bigger dopamine problems is basically dopamine dieting. When I wake up in the morning, I try not to have too much pleasure. I will meditate, I'll take cold showers, I won't watch stuff while eating or have too tasty of foods. And what I find when doing these things is that doing something that normally isn't as fun, I actually enjoy, or it's at least not bad. But if I do something fun relative to the amount of dopamine the other thing gave me, suddenly it's like pain or suffering and I don't want to do it. So over many years, I've noticed that the more I'm meditating, the more I'm dopamine dieting, the more productive I am. And even if I'm less happy in the morning, I'm actually happier because it's all relative. My life is more in control, it's moving in the directions I want, everything's always better across the board by controlling dopamine. So that's something you could also research a lot deeper. Andrew Huberman has a really good piece on this about how to engineer yourself, but it's something I've been doing for many years, and especially as an entrepreneur, working from home, having to control myself and having ADHD for many years, this is something that I think is a really useful key. Along all these pursuits, it's important to be graceful with yourself. It's so easy to have these caricatures of comparing yourself to the president or these famous people or even other people you know, but we're comparing ourselves on a much larger scale than we used to, and people are pushing themselves a lot harder in a lot of ways than they used to, and you're only seeing the most exceptional stories, and a lot of the time you're not seeing the fair stuff. A lot of people are born rich or are born just naturally attractive more, and it's not something that can be compared as much. What's important is just love yourself and to be graceful with yourself, to understand that you will fuck up and to not criticize yourself, because that makes the journey actually worse. Something from Buddhism is to really just see reality, to observe your thoughts, to focus back on what you're trying to focus on and not linger, not judge yourself, not be like, oh, well, I made it 5 minutes this time. It's better to just love yourself and take care of yourself, and that also relates back to the purpose, where if you live a life of purpose or if you're considerate towards others, then you have a responsibility to take care of yourselves that's higher than yourself. The area of my life where I had the biggest burst in productivity was when I had my personality psychology analyzed by external researchers who had viewed a lot of my content and talked to me a couple times. And this was really useful because this particular framework called objective personality is really the only scientifically accurate version of personality psychology I've ever seen. And why this is useful is that it gives you insight into your patterns about what are you overdoing and what are you underdoing in your life. And most of your life is about who you are as a person. It's about doing the right things at the right time, not being a caricature of a person, just always doing on autopilot whatever's easiest or whatever you're best at and comes naturally. Getting your personality psychology actually known and externally validated, and this isn't from self-reporting tests or tests where people just make up stuff and say people are like this, but actually scientifically method-driven stuff is so useful. For example, I thought I was more different from myself on like a relative scale than a random chance. Like I was that blind, even after all the self-reflection, knowing the stuff, being able to see other people accurately. People with certain tendencies, for example, in my personality are worse at knowing themselves, so that's actually part of the pattern. But after getting this information revealed, I was able to start knowing which side of the fence to lean on. For example, I'm somebody who gathers more than I organize. And so if I'm deciding like, oh, should I watch more information, or should I look for something new, or should I actually go back and organize notes or refer to things that worked in the past, the fact that I'm even thinking about doing that, now I know is, okay, the fact that I'm even thinking about that now means I probably already should have been doing it before. And knowing what side of the fence to lean into is really useful, and a lot of us have hunches, but actually knowing like scientifically, objectively is really useful. I developed a test with hundreds of people from the community who had been psychoanalyzed by these researchers called the 512 types test. If you Google that, you'll find it. I think it's a really good reference point with guides on how to actually utilize this sort of information. This next one is really controversial, but I really stand by it, and that's psychedelics. I've been using psychedelics for many years, and it's not something that makes me crazy, or maybe sometimes in the temporary term when exploring ideas, but it's one of those things that opens up your mind. And it essentially treats all of your different preferred neural pathways as just normal neural pathways. It's like making every street in a city a highway. And the purpose of this is that as we get older, we delegate more things to our unconscious. We have more solidly formed opinions, identities, ways of being, and we become more fixed. It's like the can't teach a dog a new old dog new tricks sort of thing. But with psychedelics, it temporarily lights up your whole brain. You can even see it in brain scans, and you'll experience this. That's why people can like see smells and hear colors and stuff. It's different regions of your brain talking to each other. Some people need this more than others, whose brains like mine operate more in isolated chunks rather than as interconnectedly. When you have this sort of insight, you're able to get to the same conclusions you've had in the past for new directions, or have insights that you already have all the data for, but maybe just didn't connect together. And with all this sort of information, if you do this every like few months or half year, you really get to see a lot more possibilities. I get so many different breakthroughs every time I do psychedelics that it's really been one of the biggest factors in my life, especially helping to appreciate the abstract world and higher level things and deeper levels of consciousness. Psychedelics have been with us since our evolution. Our brain literally has these receptors. Psychedelics like ayahuasca, LSD, magic mushrooms, mescaline, they're literally the only drugs that don't damage our brains. Alcohol, immensely damaging for our brains. Weed is even kind of damaging. Psychedelics are literally the only things that don't even not damage our brains, but actually add to our brains. They're creating new pathways, they're reorganizing information. But also be clear that even if you have this experience, you have to do the work of post-processing, of integration, of deciding, oh, I had this thought, is it actually an accurate thought or a good thought? You can check it against other people. Don't just get into a cave where you just automatically believe everything you think, but also understand that it takes time to integrate these things. Just having a thought doesn't change your opinion. Usually changing a major opinion, you have to re-justify it, relearn it, and rethink it a number of times over the course of years. For example, if you're talking to someone liberal or conservative and convince them to be the opposite, 9 times out of 10, like a week later, they're going to go back to the original opinion that they don't even think is accurate anymore, because things just take time to rewire. Psychedelics act as like a catalyst. They accelerate the equation. Everything you can do without it, but you get so much more and so much faster by using psychedelics. If you're nervous, just use a small amount the first time. They're not too hard to find. You can use like the dark web or certain internet sites. A lot of states in America are even legalizing and decriminalizing this. I've met a ton of people doing research on them for therapy, and personally myself and tons of people I know, it's accelerated overcoming trauma or hard times, and these are also one of the best tools to get unstuck. When you're on psychedelics, don't just be distracting yourself, don't be running from scary things, because everything's going to be amplified as your brain's more connected. You can lean into your shadows, take time to really think, to accept the ugliness in yourself, areas that you're being selfish or chaotic, or that you're just really not running well, and own those things. Accept that you are a bad person in a lot of ways, or that you're not what you could be, and really sit with those things. Don't hide, don't distract yourself, don't pleasure seek, but really sit with those things. It's what Carl Jung calls integrating your shadow, and psychedelics help with this so much. Alongside victims, the most toxic people are ones who haven't integrated their shadows. They don't know where their darkness is. They're like, oh, like I'm afraid of gay people because I am actually gay, or I tease obese people because I'm insecure about being obese. People are constantly blindly doing this toxic stuff. Like if you look at priests, like there's so much child rape going on in the Catholic Church, and it's because these people deny that they're allowed to do that, or they're neglecting themselves, that they have this giant tidal wave built up in their unconscious that they haven't accepted or integrated. So by doing psychedelics, it allows you to kind of open this closet, see the skeletons that are there, look them in the eye until they just sort of fade or they merge with you, and you realize that that thing is you. But you also don't have to be that person. You can then, with a clear, objective view of reality, choose to take the paths, the actions, the steps that you want to be. And don't just write them down or do them for later, but even while you're on psychedelics, you can start exercising, cleaning things. It might not seem like the best use of your trip, but these things aren't toxic. You can do these like fairly frequently if you can use them productively. Silicon Valley itself was built on psychedelics, and it's become the wealth generating and innovation capital of the planet because people are using their whole brains there. So psychedelics, some people do get bad reactions. Don't take this as doctor advice. If you have, for example, schizophrenia genetically in your family, like take a really small dose at first. But for a vast majority of people, it's actually going to make you more sane, more conscious, more happy. Even if the trip itself is a bad trip, it's not really a bad trip because you're learning, you're growing, you can absorb these things. For me personally, after the trip, I always just feel so much self-acceptance. I can literally see reality physically different when I'm sober. Like I can see the imperfections in my face and disproportions. And instead of judging myself, I just love myself, and I can accept that, and I just feel like an empty cup on some level, but I also feel like I'm just made of infinite love. And I'll be like calling people and like writing to people and telling them how much I love them, righting wrongs from the past, just moving forward a lot more consciously. And it's a good way to just feel really fresh after going through all the shit, because going through the shit, not only is the happiness relative, but you also become more conscious and you're stronger from going through that stuff. So that's really, I think, a super strong key that's being underutilized, that's now finally starting to get some traction. Another tip is journaling. If you're not journaling, try to do it at least every few months. It's nice to have a record, and when you're going through a hard time, you can actually go through and reread your journal. For example, I was going through the end of a bad relationship, and it was so helpful to be able to journal and to see reality of what I've been going through and taking notes and actually having a more clear understanding of things. Otherwise, our minds can just subjectively choose what they want to choose based on the current situation, or even rewrite the past. But by having a journal, you can actually notice the patterns and have a clearer objective of like, what were you like? What did you believe? How things were really at that time. It's important to keep in mind too, to not always expect to be the best version of yourself, because at one phase of life, you might really be optimizing for being social, and then suddenly you're not really like as productive or meditating as much, but your social life and your social skills are at their highest. But then you go too far and you're trying to find this tightrope, and you go too far the other way eventually, where you're always going back and forth. And the trick is to find like the line, to not keep overshooting it, but also to not compare yourself to how you always were in the past, to think that life is only a forward moving thing in every way. Yes, the goal is to have the highest net of everything added together at once. You can't expect to always be the best version of yourself in every way, because that's too much skills and personality traits to be able to maintain at any given moment. So have grace with yourself, and don't keep those expectations up, or else you're just going to be constantly correcting and not able to enjoy the moment and where you're at. For those of you who are not that familiar with Buddhist philosophy, aside from the religion, there's a book called The Power of Now that I think is quite useful, that teaches a lot about understanding reality and seeing things more clearly, that I think is quite good. Another book, and this will lead into habits, is Atomic Habits. That's, I think, maybe the most productive book I've ever read. And habits are a lot of the key to who we become over time. Most of life is thousands of little changes, not big things, and those thousands of little changes come from habits over time, the things we do every day. Rivers are forged from millions of years of like water and wind. So treat your habits the same way, and this will be one of the biggest keys to unlocking the next stages of your life. When determining the habits, pick things that are really, again, core to yourself, and don't pick too many things at once. Something that also works well is having reminders. Do check out that book or guides on this, but I use an app called Habit Bowl, where essentially I get reminded every day to meditate a couple times. And it's really simple, it's straightforward. I don't try to do too many habits at once, but it gives me a push notification. And from the push notification, I can literally just say, yes or no, did I do that? And having that accountability or seeing that you're on a streak is something super simple. You don't have to pay for it, it's not complicated. In addition to that, what I do is use Google Calendars, where I'll set repeated events with phone notifications and email notifications. And then I'll keep my email as an inbox and not delete it until I've done those things. So, for example, speaking on chaos earlier and how I have too much gathering and not enough organizing, I've, for the last couple of years, had a thing every Sunday just saying to organize, at 7 p.m. on a Sunday when I'm usually free. So maybe like half the time I actually do it, and I'll go through and I'll organize bookmarks or my Google Drive or like something in my room. And if it weren't for these stimuli, then I might not remember to do these things. I might not, like I literally won't remember to do these things because they're just not my nature and they're not the strongest habits. But by having these repeated reminders, they become more habits, and over time, things start to get a lot more organized. Even if it's just spending like 1 minute organizing something, that's better than nothing. When determining these habits, make sure to pick things, again, that are achievable and things that are also fun. If a habit sucks, you're not going to be able to sustain it over time because it's not fun, and we want to move towards things that are easy or enjoyable. So try to find ways to engineer your habits to be fun. For example, I've been able to go through sprints of going to the gym and weightlifting, but they never last too long. What I've realized what works for me is I like going with a friend or somebody. If I'm working out with somebody, I'm hanging out, it's a lot more enjoyable, and I feel a lot more accountable. So try to find ways to engineer these things. And even if you're not doing them as often, it's better to do things in the long run. For me with running, I would just try to run my hardest and I would track it. And tracking it was motivating, but also I'd be trying to just run the fastest every time, or I'd lose motivation, not seeing them as fast as before, or I'd feel bad after running as hard as I could, and it just like feels bad. And so I realized while on psychedelics, like because it made things clearer that weren't obvious, is I could just run like 80 or 90% as hard and actually stick to it and enjoy it more and enjoy life more instead of always pushing to the max. So take these kinds of principles and see if you can do an audit of your life. Look through from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. What are the things you repeatedly do? How do you do them? What are the things you've delegated to your unconscious? And are there ways of engineering these to be better systems, or to like stack something on top of another habit that you have, or have certain alarms or timers to remind you to do the little actions that when they build up really make mountains of lifetime change in your life? I find meditation to be an extremely useful habit, especially if you're somebody more extroverted. It's really, really, really useful, especially if you have ADHD. The people who don't want to meditate are the people who actually need it the most. Yeah, you can take like Adderall or Ritalin and Serta, but those things, when you take them, leave you a void. They have side effects. They're bad for your brain. You're dependent on them. You're having to like get this thing. But when you meditate, you just have the patience, the stillness, the control, the acceptance of life, the kind of comfort of just being okay with the moment. So meditation is a habit that I find really useful, and I shared how that works for me, is meditating in the days and then maybe 5 to 10 minutes in the afternoon. That's something I'm working more towards. There's also Vipassana retreats. You can look it up, Vipassana, where you go for 11 or 12 days, you meditate basically nonstop every day, no reading, no writing, no human contact. Those things are really good for a boot camp. The effects do wear off, but they show you what's possible, and most effective growth strategies, besides long-term habits, are periods of intensity followed by periods of rest. Going to a Vipassana retreat, I learned how to code in like a month, doing 60 to 80 hours a week, and knew more than most people learn after years of going to school for it. If you'd go to, for example, a military boot camp, you're going to come out way more fit than just like chucking away at it. Or if you immerse yourself in a language and only speak that language for a month, you're going to learn more in that month than you would through a year of clicking away at it. Habits are really important, but simultaneously you can also engineer these sort of boot camp or immersive experiences. Diet is also something that's really important. Health is important. I had a blood glucose monitor in my arm for a year recently, for a month. It's quite expensive and it's a lot of work tracking stuff, but it's nice to see the patterns of what kinds of foods work for you, because you have a unique chemistry. Being able to know different kinds of things about like dairy or carbs or the order of eating things or how much you eat and when you eat them and how those affect your energy levels are really important, because you're gonna enjoy things more if you have energy. You're also gonna be able to do things more if you have energy, to make these changes, to even just be productive in life. So being able to monitor those things and be conscious that you are created out of chemicals and what you put in there and when is really important, is gonna be another really important driving factor. When you're doing a reset period, it could be a day or it could be a few months, but it's really helpful to have physical changes in your environment that remind you that you're on a reset. Something important is, I think, doorways. It could be an entry mat, it could be the doors to your car, it could be things like your phone when you look at it. Being able to clean that mat, put something on your doorway to change your ringtones. These little reminders in your phone remind you like, oh yeah, like I'm not the person I was a year ago. Or, oh yeah, like I gotta remember these things I've been trying to keep in mind that I now want to integrate and bring into my consciousness. And also just having things clean is almost like a reset button in a way. Like when you get a new car, it usually comes clean, and that kind of makes you want to keep it clean. And that same analogy extends to your mind. It's why a lot of people like Jordan Peterson say that you should make your bed, is that if you make your bed, you start off productive, but also you have this sort of order that you've instilled into your life, and it's this sort of order that's going to create things. Some people do have a bit too much order, so part of their order structure is going to be to create more disorder, but overall the concept's the same. Another thing that helps with the reset is buying new stuff. Maybe you have some clothes with holes in them, or you have stuff that isn't as up to date, like an old blender or a backpack that's super old. Being able to buy these things reminds you that you're on a reset, that you have the next stage forward, that you deserve these good things, and that you are now having a new alignment of what you like and what your tastes are. And these things will also help drive and motivate you and keep this momentum going of accumulating this sort of life, even in the physical realm of what you want to be. Alongside just kind of the entryways and cleaning, just making general changes is useful. We're so much impacted by our environments and by our habits that actually making decisions around that can be really useful. There's a list of some of the things I made. You could change cities. If you change apartments, that's a really good time when you have all these new habits and new anchors that are really powerful. Changing partners if somebody's holding you back or like toxic or you're too comfortable with. Changing friends, your diet, the sports that you play. You can get a pet. Sometimes having more responsibility teaches you to be responsible. A lot of times, if you want something done, give it to a busy person, because they're going to be the ones figuring out how to get it done. And that also helps to overcome laziness quite a bit. Learning a new instrument, a new hobby or a new skill or a new career. You could even join an organization, volunteer, or get more education. Just go through that list and think about, is there any activity in these areas that you think will be good for you, or things that you've been putting off that you've always wanted to do. There was a guy named Joseph Adler who was one of the greatest psychologists of history that today isn't that researched because of all the victim mentality and the people's desire for ease and excuses. But Joseph Adler put forward that it's been accepted by a lot of major psychologists and the top performers that we have so much more control of our lives than we think. That if you have some sort of fear or phobia or limitations, it's because you've chosen to have those things control you because they create excuses or keep you safe. And understanding that you can turn a lot of things on their head gives you a lot more agency. For example, if you think you have a bad relationship with someone because you're arguing with them a lot, it's actually probably the case that you're arguing a lot because you don't want to have a good relationship with that person. So take a lot of the things, a lot of the excuses in your life, a lot of the things that can be holding yourself back, and understanding how can you put that on its head and move forward, or find ways or root strategies to then realign the stories you tell yourself to move forward. As you're doing these things, you'll start to earn more self-respect because you realize that by investing in yourself, it's because you're a person worth investing in, and this identity builds over time. And again, it's not a linear route, it's not always easy, and it's not always fun, but also purpose and growth and meaning are the ultimate fun. With these, be compassionate with yourself. A few more points. Don't always look for external validation or external things. I used to have a problem of expecting a partner to fill different needs, but over time I realized that I can just become the things that I'm looking for, be that which you seek. And by absorbing things, like if you admire people who are good at like puzzles or good at drawing, you can actually become those things, and then you're not looking for those things externally, and you're a more whole, complete person yourself. You're not as reliant on others, and you can accept them as they are and just have true connection and companionship instead of trying to fill needs and using people in that sense. Another one is just being really moral, reaching out to people who you've wronged or stopping things you're doing now that you're not good with, because you can't really be in line with loving yourself, taking care of yourself, accomplishing your dreams with negative feelings of guilt and pride that we evolved to check ourselves that we can be a cooperative species. So by being in synchronicity with your morality and your values and drawing these lines, you become a person worth more taking care of and a person you have pride in. Another one is to have strong conviction in your own taste, in your own identity, in your own likes. I remember going through a phase where I thought, oh, that person's cooler and more stylish and they have cool taste, but at the end of the day, taste is completely subjective. Yes, more people can find something funny or attractive or whatnot, but at the end of the day, like, it is completely subjective. And if you like something and you think that's the coolest thing, be proud of that or honor that. And then most of people's realities are just morphing around other people's realities. So if you're confident about it, other people respect that, they like you, even if you have your own vibe, your own style that's different. It's better to rock that than to live something that you're not. Wrapping up here, a couple last things. There's a concept of your higher self. It's imagining an idealized version of yourself. And sometimes in moments you could be like, what would my highest self do? My own highest self, because I'm a bit more hyperactive, is very poised, calm, not rushing decisions, not reacting to things, not making decisions like quickly, but thinking deeper and stuff. So having that sort of vision of a person, what do they look like? What's their energy like? You can realize that you are that person and channel that person and absorb it. It's a lot of the concept of how people used to use spirit animals. Another one is remembering where you want to go in the world, setting goals, be conscious of moving towards what you want, and just constantly driving towards that and sending those reminders and building that momentum. Another useful concept from Matthew McConaughey is about his hero is himself in 5 years. I really like this concept because it's a constantly moving target. Goals are not fixed. You reach a goal, you don't have anywhere else to go. But if you're always moving towards your idealized version of yourself in 5 years, you're not holding yourself to other people's standards, but you're being true to yourself, and you're going to be on a road that you can't judge yourself for not always getting to because you're not comparing yourself to something externally. But you're also always going to be moving towards the version of yourself that you want to be. And again, remember to do these resets every so often, because it's so easy, even if we're doing well in life, to get sidetracked or to not even be doing as well as we could be. Once you start doing all these things, there is really a best part that this really unlocks, but I'm not going to share that because it's something you need to experience. I don't want to give away a good ending. So I hope you enjoyed sitting through this. I hope you get even just a little bit of a takeaway or action towards this. Feel free to rewatch it, to pause, to actually do the exercises, because they're so useful. And if you have some of your own techniques, things that you've found that really work for you that I think people would like that I haven't touched on, do share those in the comments below. But love you guys, wish you well, and let's make this world better and ourselves better along the way.